Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic for today's discussion is to continue in our evaluation of the fundamental basis of economics. And as you'll recall, in the previously posted lecture, we went through and talked specifically about how the theory is constructed. And you definitely want to watch that first lecture because I'm not redoing all that stuff. But we noted that this economic system of analysis is a positive system, meaning it's just a factual, logically organized set of principles about people's behavior, about how people make choices under these constraints of scarcity. And we noted that the way the theory is built is to, number one, specifically define terms that are what we know exactly what we're talking about when we make a definition, and then build what are called the assumptions of the model. The assumptions are those factual observations of reality that we believe will help us focus on how to understand a particular process or problem or things of that nature. And then after having built the assumptions, then we close the window on reality and we say, well, look, if these assumptions are true, what would I expect to see as a result of that? And those are called the implications of the theory. And the theory is normally expressed as a hypothesis. It's an if-then statement. If these assumptions are accurate, then I predict these implications will follow from that. And finally, I pointed out to you that in deciding which theories to adopt, what you want to focus on is how well does the theory predict? How well does the theory predict? Not on how many equations there are or how many millions of dollars have been spent on equipment or any of that other kind of stuff. How well does the theory predict? Sometimes very simple theories predict a lot better and more accurately than some complex presentations. Good. So I want to start with definitions. We're going to define a good as being anything that an individual would like to have more of, measured at zero price, meaning basically free. Critical point to constantly keep in your mind when we talk about goods. It's not just the materialistic things that we're talking about, but it includes all those other things that bring you satisfaction. Friendship, honor, love, respect, personal ability, right? Knowledge. All of these things are things that bring us satisfaction. And so when you hear the term goods, it means both material and non-material kinds of aspects. In fact, when we talk about choice, you all make trade-offs between material and non-material all the time. You decide to work a little more to make some more dollars to get more material, or you decide not to and spend time with a loved one, or pursue developing a loved one. So we're constantly making choices between the two. For something to be a good, you have to desire it. It's a personal issue with respect to an individual. As I said, I like the flavor of Bombay Sapphire gin. To some of you, gin tastes horrible. So it's a matter of taste, a matter of education, a matter of experiences. And a good is something that you want to have. It brings you some degree of personal satisfaction. We're interested in analyzing the number of units in a time period that you still desire to acquire. And so a good is contained in that quantity where you still want more of it. Everybody with me? For it to be a good, you have to desire it. If you get satiated with one particular product, meaning the next unit I don't want to have, then that unit is not a good. So it's contained to those that you really would like to have. And as I said, it's measured at zero price, meaning that it gives you any satisfaction whatsoever, or even a chance of satisfaction, then you may desire to have it. How much you buy is a much more complex calculation, and that's based on a bunch of other information. So goods are just the things I want to have more of. Resources are anything at all that could be used to produce the things that I would like to have. Anything that could be used to produce goods would be called a resource. And as I said, when you studied 160 or the basic courses, they divided resources into three general categories. Land, meaning all the attributes of a geographic location, which could be used to produce different goods. So weather would matter, the soil would matter, the view from the property would matter, the proximity to water, all of those characteristics. And then gold and silver underneath the ground, or gas, or natural gas or oil. But land means natural resources. It means that whole set of characteristics which may benefit individuals. Labor, I said, is just people. Don't think about it as labor as the guy digging a ditch. But labor just means people are a major resource. And as I said to you before, because so much of our satisfaction in life comes from our interaction with other people, that people is a major source of goods, right? The people around you and the people in the country and so forth are a major source of goods. Finally, capital refers to real buildings and equipment, and that is a source of productivity. And then I added in time as a resource, pointing out the fact that everything uses up time. Everything, whether it's consuming or producing or whatever you're doing, there's an element of a resource being used, which in fact is time. And I mentioned that for you as individuals, time is probably your most scarce resource, because you're trying to do all the things that you're attempting, taking 12, 15 units, right? You're working so many hours, you have religious obligations, family obligations, you have social obligations, hopefully. So there are all these things you want to do, and so I understand it's tough, right, to make all these choices. The United States has a very high standard of living, and relative to all other countries and areas of the world. So if you look at these categories of resources, which might you say is the largest generator of potential goods? Which of these resources is most valuable in terms of, particularly in the development of the United States as a successful economic system? Yeah, your name is?
Labor.
Your name is?
Andre.
Andre?
Yeah.
Why?
Labor, because I feel like people's help build this country from the ground up.
Okay, good. Alternatives? Yeah.
I would say capital.
Tell me more.
Because you can't you can't generate goods without building equipment, and you can't profit.
And having the equipment and capital allows the worker to do a lot more, to be much more productive. In fact, to do things he couldn't do or she couldn't do without them. Good. Arguments have been made for all three of these. There are books written about natural resources in particular that stresses the fact that the United States, I know the Indians were here first, but when the Europeans began to colonize the United States, there were just this wealth of resources around, streams full of salmon. And in fact, it turns out that the United States system of rivers is the biggest system of transportation and navigable waterways for any country in the world. Many countries have one or two rivers, right? And we have this amazingly complex system, which provided for the ability to move things at a very low cost and allowed the economy to grow. And most major cities were located close to water, right? Because that was a major aspect. I would argue also that it is people, and I would argue it in this way. If you think about the people who came to colonize the United States from Europe, what's the standard explanation of why they came? Anybody? You guys have all had American history. What's the reason they came?
Religious freedom.
Right, to seek religious freedom, and others would argue to seek opportunity, right? Because there were all these opportunities that were here. So I look at that assumption and then I think, well, many of the people who came over were not religiously persecuted, and many people who were in Europe who were religiously persecuted did not get on the boats. So I'm looking for some common thread that would be true about all of the people that got on the boats. What characteristic would have to be true about all the people who got on the boats? Well, it turns out that for a long period of time, and this was well known in Europe, number one, how do you get to the United States? Well, you get on giant sailboats, right? Big sailboats. And a sailboat depends upon the wind blowing in the right direction to move the boat across the Atlantic Ocean. So sometimes your boat would get out in the middle of the Atlantic and then the winds would just stop and your boat would just sit there. And eventually you would have eaten all the animals and drank all the water and the whole boat dies of starvation, right? Or the wind blows too strong, right, and blows the boat over and then you're dead also. So it was well known, and by the way, once you got to the United States, there were various strains of viruses that the European gene stock had never been exposed to, and many people died from diseases because they, you know, there was one colony, the whole colony was wiped out. I forget, it was in Virginia. The whole colony got something and they were all wiped out. So it turns out that the probability of getting on a boat, making it safely across the Atlantic, and living for 1 year was approximately 1/3. It was approximately 1/3. 2/3 of the people didn't make it. Everybody with me, right? But there were all these people who got on the boats, right, and came over. So what characteristic would be applicable to all of those people? Yeah.
The benefit that they would receive if they made it, if they were part of that 1/3, would be higher than the cost of getting on that boat.
Yeah, the expected present value of the future was more than the dollar cost of getting on the boat. Good. And in fact, it was very expensive. It was very, very expensive. Many people who could not afford to pay their passage would sign contracts with someone who had money, and then they would sell their future labor services for the money now to pay for the ticket to get over to the United States. They were called indentured service, and the standard contract was 7 years, but it gave you flexibility as a person to get over there, right? And you know, you promised to work for 7 years to pay back, you know, the loan you had received, and then you were a free person after that period of time. You can't do that anymore. You can't sell your future labor services and get money today, which is a constraint on our behavior. Good, but what else would have to be true about each person? The chance of making it is only 1/3. Somebody else? Anybody? Yeah.
The risk takers.
Absolutely. They're risk takers, right? All of them are risk takers. Because they knew, I'm going to pay a lot of money and I'm going to get on this boat, and there's 2/3 of the time I won't make it, or 2/3 of the people won't make it. So the commonality of that characteristic of being risk takers was prevalent in all the people who came to the United States. And then if you extend that analysis beyond just the colonization from Europe, that's true of all the immigrants who've come to the United States, both legal and illegal. These people are risk takers, right? Families from Iran left Iran, didn't speak any English, managed somehow to pay enough money to get to the United States. They didn't speak the language, right? They'd given up their whole extended family, right, and so forth, for the opportunity to be in this new place where there were better opportunities than at home. And the same thing's true of all the immigrants from Latin America, Honduras and Guatemala. There's a film. It's been out for, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years now, but there's a film of these kids getting on trains and getting on the top of the train and basically hitchhiking, or and staying on top of the train all the way up from Guatemala up through Mexico and then finally getting into the United States. So that is a prevalent characteristic of the entire population of the United States, and that is we are risk-taking people in that as a result of that. The fact that we're risk-taking people has led to the development of the extended wealth of the country, because risk-taking leads to profitability. Y'all with me? Profits come from taking risks, right? And Americans are known to be entrepreneurial and known to be, interested in finding new ways to do things. And a lot of that comes from, I would say, the genetic makeup of the population. And also, if you go the other way, the people who left Europe were the risk takers, meaning the people who stayed in Europe were not the risk takers. So you would see less development of new ideas and products and so forth there as a result of the fact that the really smart people left. And this goes on today. In fact, you guys know the term is brain drain from many, many countries, where the young people will come to the United States, get an education, and then stay. Or when Great Britain had a marginal tax rate of 90%, a lot of the smartest people went to the United States, right? Where it was only 70% at that time. Good. So that would be my argument on that. So I've only defined two terms. Define goods, define resources, and I'm already ready to set up the basic assumptions. The first one is people want more. People want more. Throughout history, throughout the world, people simply want more. It's just a condition. And I told you about the lottery thing, where the people who had won 10,000 were interviewed later, and they said they were not better off. 70% of them said they were not better off. And I said, just give me 1 million, and I'll tell you if the rest of my life I'm better off. But people want more, and it need not be money. It may not be material things. Even the ascetic monks in Tibet would like greater knowledge of the deity, right? Or a little bit more hay, or a little bit better tasting wine, or whatever. So it seems to be a reasonable statement, observation, but it is an assumption that forms the foundation of the economic logical system. People want more. Milton Friedman has a great 5-minute video on greed, and it's fun to watch. You ought to click it on your notes and do it. He's interviewed by a liberal talk show host, and I can't remember the guy's name, probably because he is a liberal talk show host. But it's a great little speech, because he talks about greed, and greed is simply the desire for more. In fact, if you think about it, the desire for money is not the desire for money. It's the desire for what? What you can get with the money, right? What you can exchange it for. So it just represents that desire for more in the population. And then the dismal science comes in and says, yeah, but our resources are limited. We don't have enough resources to do all the things we would like to do. As a person, as a family, as a city, state, nation, and the world, we just don't have enough resources to produce all the things we would like to produce. Do we have enough resources in the world to grow enough rice to feed the world's population? Think of all the resources in the world. Is there enough there, if we dedicated to growing rice, is there enough there to produce enough rice to feed the world population? Think about it. Suppose you took all these resources and moved it into rice. Yeah, we could do it, right? But we don't. And there are people that die of starvation, right, all over the world. And there are famines and these kinds of things. Well, the reason is that we want more, but we want more of other things too, right? I want more fish to go on top of the rice, right? And so it's an interesting observation about the world that we all have wants, and we seek those wants, and we have differing degrees of wants, and what gets produced is the result of those desires. So the term scarcity describes this situation, and that is there are not enough resources to do all the things we would like to do, and we define a good as being scarce if the amount you would like to have at zero price is more than what's available at zero price. And I suggested to you in your notes at this point to insert scarce good is the same as economic good, just for language purposes. An economic good means it's a scarce good. It means it commands a positive price in the marketplace. Free goods are the things that are available in large enough quantity where we don't have to, where you wouldn't be willing to pay for them because they're free. There's plenty available to you. And I pointed out that this photograph from 1969 had a tremendous effect on the conservation movement because it said that's all there is, right? It was an actual photograph. It's surrounded by space, which you can't live in, and there it is. And it was called The Good Spaceship Earth, and it really brought home this idea of limited resources. So what are the implications of this condition? What does this condition of scarcity imply I would be likely to see? And the first is people have to make choices. People have to make choices, and you do it every day. You have to choose amongst all these things you'd like to do, which am I going to apply my resources to acquire. And then, and this is the most important concept in economics, is this difference of how we measure cost as opposed to the way people talk about cost, which is accounting cost. The economic cost of any choice is, and it's also called opportunity cost, makes it clear, but the economic cost is the value of the next best thing you could have done with that resource that you didn't do because you did this. So it's the value of the highest valued alternative given up as a result of the choice. Notice some of the corollaries to that. Economic costs always comes from the current available alternatives. Economic cost has to come from those things that are possible to do with my resources at this particular point in time or in the future. So it's distinct from accounting cost, and the way it's distinct is that accounting cost measures the actual expenditure you've made. The example I like to use is you go to a movie and you ask the accountant, what was the cost? He would say, how much was the ticket? $14. How much was parking? $3. How much was the gas to get there? 30 cents. So what did I say? $17.30 would be the accounting cost of going to the movie. You ask the economist, what's the economic cost of going to the movie? He would ask the same questions. How much was the ticket, parking, and gas? But then he would say the cost is not the $17.30. It's what you would have used that money to do if you hadn't gone to the theater. You with me? The actual cost is what you gave up that you could have done with those resources, plus the value of those 3 hours of time. That's another resource that was used up in that particular activity. So economic costs always come from existing alternatives, and it is the value of the best one that you give up. Now notice something about comparing that accounting cost and economic cost. Accounting cost you can record because actual transactions took place, right? You spent the money or whatever. Economic cost is much more difficult in some cases because you're trying to value something that you didn't do. You all with me? It's the value of the best alternative that you didn't do. Now, within a firm, I can probably estimate the alternative value of my resources and what they would produce, right? And what other product I would produce with them. And that would be the economic cost of using them. But in life, since you're trying to value things that you didn't do, it's hard to do in some situations in that way. So three definitions. Yeah.
I have a question. On this sunk cost, so is it basically anything that you spent money on?
Well, spent money or resources like time, right? Yeah, sunk cost.
Say like I bought like a T-shirt, and I was like, I bought it with my money, and then I returned it. that still be a sunk cost, or is it just?
No, because then, because if you were able to get the money back, right, if you were able to return it and get the money back, then it's not a sunk cost because it represents an opportunity to recapture the value, right? The example I use is your tuition, right? And that is once that's not refundable, then it's a sunk cost, right? You can't get it back. And therefore, it does not affect the economic cost of your decision. The cost of being here today by the accounting cost, would be total tuition divided by number of units, divided by number of class meetings, divided by number of periods, and you'd get $137, right, or something per class period. But the economist would say to you, look, in making decisions among alternatives, if you can't get the money back, then that's not relevant to your decision of whether to be here or not. What is relevant is what you could be doing with your time, because that's the opportunity cost of being here. Good. Yeah.
Just when it comes to tuition, though, we pay the tuition, but then our opportunity cost is our education that we're going to receive in our degree.
No, the value of your expenditure is the value of the degree you're receiving, right? If you chose to use that money to go on vacation as opposed to paying for your education here, the economic cost of the vacation would be the value you would have received of getting the education. Right? And by the way, on that point, the unemployment rate of college graduates is about 2%. And the benefit of going to a 4-year degree increases your lifetime earnings by 73% over people who do not get a college education. Y'all with me? 73% more lifetime earnings by getting a 4-year degree. And these are averages, obviously. And the highest return is by getting a degree in economics. So, by the way, in terms of employment, there are a lot of jobs that pay 6 figures for individuals who have the skill of coding. And there are schools, and there's several in LA, but there's one major one that has like an 18-month program. I think the tuition is probably $20,000. But their placement rate is 95%. In placement of their graduates in jobs that earn more than $100,000 is 95%. So as you look at your future, if that kind of activity is interesting to you, right? And it's not, by the way, that you're going to get a job writing code. It's not that you're necessarily going to write code. It's the skill of being able to read and modify code that is what generates the value to these companies. Y'all with me? It's the ability, everybody has specialized software by now, right? Or even canned software that you purchased. The ability to go in and make changes to that, the ability to see the code, understand the code, and then modify it is very, very valuable. So, yeah, just some general information for you. So get an econ degree and then go to coding. And then get a PhD and have fun with your life. Implications are you have to make choices. Didn't I already do this? No. You have to choose amongst all these alternatives. Secondly, you incur this economic cost. And third, which is not so obvious, because of scarcity, we are in a natural state of competition. We're in a natural state of competition with each other. Because if resources go to produce what you want, they can't go to produce what I want. Everybody with me? So because of scarcity all over the world, Miss, would you close those 2 computers and stop playing with each other? Okay? Thank you. Because you're just back having fun. You ought to go out and have a beer. Don't sit here while I'm talking and you're not paying any attention to it. The third implication is we are naturally in a state of competition with everybody else in society. There are people who've written books that say capitalism causes competition. No, capitalism doesn't cause competition. Capitalism is a form of competition. But competition exists all over the world in every country that there is. because of scarcity. And there are different ways that people compete and so forth. John Lennon wrote this song called Imagine. And that's a good title for it, Imagine. And it was imagine all the people and everything is wonderful and we all love each other and we share and there are no boundaries and there are no religions and it's just a wonderful place. No, there's scarcity, right? Good. Now, we then said, well, how do people compete? What are the different categories by which people compete? And I said to you, the basic form of competition is the use of violence. It's the primary form of nature. It's the primary form of when humankind was first developing. Either the use of violence or the threat of violence is a means of competition. And then as societies developed, they adopted various kinds of rules of behavior under which competition could take place, which was much less costly than violence. And all these games that are played are all examples of social political competition. First place in the NFL, scarce good, there's rules of how to get there, etc. Playing tennis, all these things, like getting an A in this class. Social political competition. There's a series of things you need to learn and know and be able to express, and that's how those scarce goods are, in fact, allocated. And then finally, as we said, societies have moved to some extent, and differing extents across the world, to adopt economic or market competition. And that is the exchange system. That's the system where I produce value for others. I acquire dollars because that's the medium of exchange. And then I use the dollars to bid for the things I would like to have. So that's the economic form of competition or the exchange system of competing. Produce value for others, receive something in return of value, and then use that to acquire in trade the things you would like to in fact have to consume. Every philosophy, existential and every basic philosophy, includes one primary goal, and that is that you want to adopt a system that's a fair system. It's called the everyman rule, and that is, if you don't know who you're going to be coming into society, you don't know if you'll be rich or poor or tall or short, or you don't know anything about where you'll be. You want the system to be such that no matter what I come in with, I have an equal opportunity to compete with the other people, right? So fairness is a major goal, and it doesn't mean equal distribution because you have scarcity. It means equal opportunity to compete within whatever the system is to acquire the goods that you would like to, in fact, have. Well, we noted that violence is not a fair system. Some people are really good at violence, other people are not. So that doesn't give us all an equal opportunity. And then the various social political systems which depend upon a limited characteristic or a limited behavior does not give us equal opportunity either. Suppose the system is we allocate goods to people who swim the fastest. Does that give you all an equal opportunity? And the answer is no. Some of you, your body coordination's great and you'd be better at it than others. And then who argues the best? No. No matter what you focus on, who runs the fastest, who sings the best, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be equal. It's not going to be fair to somebody, right? Because some people are better at these things than others. Incidentally, as a corollary, suppose goods were allocated to people who swim the fastest. What things would you, if that were the system, what things would you tend to observe in society? People who swim the fastest get the food and shelter.
People, you're going to study the person who does it better than you. You're going to look at the person who does it better than you. You're going to study, right?
Good, yes.
I feel like you look at like body type.
That's just a word. You guys love to do this. You pull out words. Tell me a sentence. No, you're right. But I just said make it into a sentence. I think what you're saying is certain people who have certain body types will be more wealthy, right? Because they'll be better at it. Good, good. And then your point was really interesting. You said you'd look at the people who are successful and try to emulate what they're doing. Right, good. So what you would, yes, ma'am.
I think it has nothing to do with the body type. I think it's like the successful, the people who choose to work at it the most are going to get the most resources.
Well, there's certainly some advantage if you have big lungs like, what's his name, the swimmer. But I agree with you. In fact, just to follow up on that, that's the next implication. What you'd see is all kinds of swimming pools all over the place. And there'd be all kinds of classes to teach people how to swim better. And guys who had better techniques would get paid more money, right? Because they got you to swim faster and so forth. What would be true about the social status of people who are good swimmers? The social status.
Highly regarded.
Highly regarded, particularly in mating, right? And so what would you see? You'd see the better swimmers marrying each other, right? Good. And so genetically, you'd see an increase in the ability of the society to swim faster because the genetic makeup is being rewarded by getting the resources that are in fact available. Good. So whatever the system is, people will try to get better at the system, and resources will be dedicated to getting better at that particular system. Japan, as you know, is an island, and historically, great scarcity, and the organization of society was such that there were lords, and they had warriors that worked for them, and they were called samurais, and they would fight with each other. And the samurai was a vaulted individual because he was good at violence. Y'all with me? He was very valuable because he was good at conducting violence in that competition between these groups. Gradually over time, Japan, like most nations, adopted other ways of economic competition, and the martial arts now became hobbies. But they were derived from the ability of the samurai to actually compete using violence as the form of competition. And then now, as I said, they're more, for fun, right, as opposed to that. Good. Suppose that I'm king of the village, and I say to you, I'm going to allocate the food and shelter to those of you who have blonde hair and blue eyes. So if you have those characteristics, blonde hair and blue eyes, you're going to get food and shelter. You don't have either one of those, right? What are you going to do?
Get my own.
Get your own what? Oh, good. Who just said that? Go for it.
No, I mean, I just said die.
Oh, die.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Which is not a valuable alternative.
You and the rest of the people who aren't wanted boys
Would
probably relocate to another area and maybe form their
you
own
could,
family.
or you could stay here and do what? Yeah, it's a great thing. People are so innovative. They really are. No matter what system you do, people will find a way to compete, right? So you peroxide your hair, you get blue contact lenses. Say, okay, Tance, I have blonde hair and blue eyes. And they, no, you just have fake. The law says blonde hair and blue eyes. I have blonde hair, my eyes are blue, right? Good. But you're getting really hungry, guys. What else could you do? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, absolutely. You'd say, look, listen, he's a little guy, right? And he's old. And it wouldn't take much just to, get rid of him. Yeah, when people are not successful at one form of competition, the incentive would be to change the form of competition to one in which I can succeed, right? Good. And that's exactly what you tend to see. Kim Jong-un, right, is the leader of North Korea, and he's a dictator, and he wants to maintain himself in power. And a lot of the goods are going for military stuff and not for consumption by the general population. And so he's got to be worried that all these people who are not being satisfied might want to overthrow him. Well, he's not stupid. He may be strange and an alien, but he's not stupid. He has a 1,000,000-man army that is well fed and well trained, and they get shelter and food to protect him from those people who, in fact, you hire the people who would be good at violence. Y'all with me? You hire the people who would be the threat of overthrowing me, and then you hire them to defend me in the regime. Saddam Hussein in Iraq was a dictator, and again allocated many resources to the military, and there was a subset of the military called the Red Guard, and the Red Guard were specifically tasked with protecting him and his extended family and all of his mansions that were all over Iraq. And they received one year, each one received a solid gold M16 rifle. It didn't work because it was solid gold, but they were paid very, very well, again, to prevent anybody from overthrowing him at that time. Good. So as I said, social political is not fair because no matter what it is, somebody will be better at it than other people. I taught in the international MBA program at USC, and it was an 18-month program, and these are people from all over the world, and they're really smart people because it's the executive MBA, and they were making a lot of money. They were making like $150,000 a year, and they took 18 months off to get this degree, also with the fact that USC has an extensive network of graduates who provide a great network, for jobs and all that kind of stuff. But I taught the same course, and USC has a really neat thing, and that is that every Friday there's a get-together with beer and wine, and the students and faculty all mixed together. So you have these opportunities to really get to know the students, and I had about 40 students in the class. But at the end, this Japanese woman came up to see me and said, she wasn't tearful, but she was very emotional. And she said, I want to tell you that your class has changed my life. And as a faculty, it's like, is that good or bad? But she said, when you talked about the fairness thing, she said, I realized that I've spent so much of my life in anger about things being unfair. And people protest and they do all, and she said she realized now that no matter what the system is, somebody's not going to have an advantage, right? And so that was a big breakthrough for her. I had another woman, an older woman in my class here that took 310 upper division, and she got a B in the class, and she did well. And I saw her about 6 months later at some kind of a function, and she came up, and the reason I thought about it was, you strongly affected my life. She said, you ruined my life. And I said, why? Well, she had been part of 4 women who were all really close friends, and they were all extremely liberal. And they would meet and, rage about things. And then the more she studied economics, the more she thought of the world differently. And so they would talk about something, and she'd say, well, actually, no, that's not what's happening. So she lost all 3 of her closest friends because they thought she had turned into a capitalist or something. So anyway. Good. So the conclusion is life's not fair, right? All these systems, no matter what system you acquire, some people are made better off than other people. But I would argue that the market system is probably the most fair because it offers you the broadest spectrum of competing, in a market system, you can do anything that other people value, and if you do it really well, you can make a lot of money doing it. You were growing up. Your name is
Jose.
Jose was growing up, and he noticed, his parents noticed, he was really good at solving problems between people, he was one of these people that could just talk to people and understand them and get things to work out better. So he went on to get a degree in psychology and then a PhD in psychiatry. Can you make many dollars doing that? And the answer is yeah. Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, right? This guy's he's a millionaire, right? And he has a lot of clients that are movie stars and stuff, but he has a TV show where he brings on really stupid people. And then he tells them on the show, you are really stupid. And it's a great show. He makes a lot of money doing it. He said, why do you let him do that? Don't let him do that anymore, right? Commercial break, right? But you can do anything. You know, I mean, maybe you're good at you know, quantitative thinking. So you can specialize in that and then become a programmer. I had a good friend when I was in the master's program up at Hayward, whose son was in high school, and he was just a loser. I mean, no, he was. He didn't do good academically, and he didn't have many friends and stuff, and he spent most of his time up in his room playing video games and so forth. But he learned that he could figure out the code behind the video game. He figured out how to program video games. And he created a game, and the game you will recognize is Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? He created that game. Do you all know the game?
No.
Well, it's a little bit dated, but it was a game, a video game, and you had to spot Carmen Sandiego on the screen and find her and stuff like that. And it went viral, and it was in 12 languages, and he became a multimillionaire and by specializing in that particular area. So, and he did buy a nice house for his mother. So, but you can do anything. You can make a great hot sauce, right? You can make great music. Yo-Yo Ma plays the cello, right? Beautifully, makes a lot of money. Bono is a famous singer that you don't know about either. Yeah. But you can do anything. I mean, you can't do any of these things, but you can take a little white ball. But you can take a little white ball and throw it really fast and move it around. Can you make many dollars doing that? Yeah, these pitchers make millions of dollars. Shaq was he's a big guy, able to take an orange ball and throw it through a hoop, right? Like that's what he does for a living, right? Millionaire, right? Good. One of my favorites is Beckham, who was a soccer player, and he got a contract with the Galaxy, Los Angeles Galaxy, $125 million to kick around a little black and white ball, but he had the ability to bend it, so it was called Bend It Like Beckham, right? And then the first season, he got a bad ankle, and so he couldn't play. But then he went to Europe and played and made money over there. And I guess he's retired or something. But you can do anything. Look, there's some people who are really attractive, right? By society standards, right? There's some people who are like beautiful people, right? You can make a lot of money just being a beautiful person, right? Aren't the Kardashians, isn't that it? Right? Right? And so forth. So life's not fair, but the market gives you the broadest spectrum of ways, in fact, to compete. What is that? So economics is about people making choices, and micro is the study of individual decision making by business firms and households. Macro is the study of the entire economic system, and we look at what determines interest rates, what is the role of Congress, what is the Federal Reserve, how do they operate, why did Donald Trump get elected, and so forth. And there are various mechanisms of choice. Many choices are made politically through representatives. In different countries, also, different amounts of decisions are made by politicians. In the Soviet Union, which was a totalitarian state, there was a central committee that determined exactly what would get produced, and then you took a test when you were 14, and this is true in parts of Europe also. And then based on how well you did on the test, you then got a career. So you took the test, and then they came to you and said, you're an electrician. And you said, no, I'm an actress. No, you're an electrician, and you will be for the rest of your life, right? So different systems have different degrees of control by the political group. And then economic or market competitions are made by 330 million people in the United States, making choices based on their own desires about things and on the relative prices that exist in that system. And the simple diagram of the exchange system of competition is called the circular flow model. You've all seen this probably many, many times. I've added in credit markets. But basically, it shows the exchange system. And you want to commit this to memory because this is just a simple diagram of what the economic system is. Households made up of by yourself or with roommates or with a family or a significant other make a series of decisions. And they decide who to work for or how to sell their resources or how to rent their resources. Who am I going to get a job with, right? And so forth. And business firms are teams of people who organize production as a team because there are benefits of working as a team. And they decide what combination of these resources they want to use to produce the goods that they're going to do. You offer the rental use of your time or your equipment or your land or whatever, and you get a flow of dollars coming back, which is called income. So income is the flow of money from business firms to households in exchange for the use of their resources. Business firms, which is the center of production in society, and it could be one person or more likely it's a group of people working together, and they have to decide what inputs to use and then what to put into their products, what to include in their products. And right now, all over the world, there are these committee meetings going on where they're discussing what is it that people want. What is it that people want? Like accounting firms used to just do accounting, and they send teams out, audit teams, to go into businesses and evaluate the financial statements and so forth. But they realized that in doing that, they got a lot of insight into the way the firm operates. And so most of them have now become business consulting firms where they not only do the accounting auditing, but they do management, helping in managing the company and building the right organizational structure to manage the company and do these kinds of things. So firms have to decide what it is that they're going to, in fact, do. Have I talked about Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs was a consummate entrepreneur, and meaning he had an ability to be very, very successful in business. And the reason is that he always began by thinking about people. He always began, and we're doing marketing, right? And I'll talk a lot more about this later, about target marketing. Who is the target audience, and what is it they want to have? And Steve Jobs really started at the ultimate level of saying, what do people want? What are a list of things people would like to have? And one of them is the ability to listen to the music that I like, performed well by the best orchestra or whatever, anywhere, at any time, no matter where I am. I'd like to be able to just snap my fingers and hear the Boston Pops playing the 1812 Overture with live cannons. And so he said, okay, that's what people would like to have. Is there a way to approximate that with products? He said, well, we have these little cheap hard drives now, which are small and portable, and people could record their music on them and then carry them with them wherever they go, because they're really small. And they could have little earphones, right? Earpods, right? So that was the beginning of the concept. And then he said, well, how would they buy the music? Well, at that time, you bought the music on CDs. And if you liked Diana Krall and one of her songs or two of her songs, you had to buy the whole CD of 15 songs and hope that you learned to like the other songs that you hadn't heard before. And it was like 18 or 20 bucks. And so he approached the companies that have the ownership of copyright of music, and there's several different organizations. And he said to them, I'd like to be able to enter into a contract with you where I could sell individual songs and obviously compensate you for each sale that I make, right? And it was a big blowback initially. These people said, no, we're not going to do that, because they couldn't figure out the business model, because it was a total change of the whole music industry. But eventually, things worked out, and they could see that it was going to work, and they gave him those rights. And he set up like the iTunes store, right? And you can buy individual songs, 99 cents, or you can buy albums, right, on there. And then you could download them onto this little device. And so he revolutionized the entire music industry with that, and made a lot of money doing it. He was a son of a bitch to work with. He was a real asshole, which I'm allowed to say because that's a technical economic term, right? But he really was. And the reason was he was just absolute about stuff. And they had the phone pretty well designed, and they'd gone around and made and they were almost into manufacturing. They'd figured out the manufacturing process. And he came in and he said, I want to move the home button. And they said, well, we can't. Yes, we can. And so, all this work was for naught, and they moved it to where it is now, right? The bottom of the face of the phone. But a consummate entrepreneur in figuring out what it is people want, and then try to produce in response to that. Good. So that's business firms deciding what to produce. 70% of U.S. production is repurchased by American households, and obviously the rest is sold to organizations and internationally. And the dollar flow coming back to firms in exchange for the use of those products is called revenue. So revenue is the stream of money coming to firms in exchange for the use of their services or their products. And then finally, so households have these two decisions to make: who to sell to, and then what to buy. And a third decision is when to buy. And so there are these credit markets that exist as means of trading the use of money over time, And there are these financial assets, which are just products, called bonds, called stocks. And then there's a whole bunch more, ETFs and all kinds of these things. But those are products that allow for the transfer of ownership of the use of money over time. So if a firm wants to borrow money to expand their operation, they can sell bonds in the marketplace. And the bonds are a contractual obligation to pay you what is stated on the bond, but it's a means of moving the use of money between the two groups. Households in general provide money into the credit markets in the major portion of your life, and that is your 401ks, your pension plans, your buying of real estate to invest, all those kinds of things. The only two times you take out, mostly, is for buying a car or buying a house. If you're buying groceries on your credit card, pay it off, right? I speak from experience. Anyway, credit markets are the exchange of the use of money over time. Business firms borrow so they can invest and build up their buildings and then generate revenue and then pay back out of the future revenue. And as I said, households tend to offer that use of money over time and be compensated with some additional premium for using my money in that way. So that basically is the exchange system. Our assumptions are households attempt to maximize personal satisfaction, which we call utility, which means long-run personal satisfaction, in the decisions that they're in fact making. And we assume that business firms are attempting to maximize economic profit. Economic profit. The difference between the revenue flow coming in and the economic cost of using those particular resources. And we are assuming that they attempt to maximize that by choosing what products to produce and which combination of inputs to use and what technology, etc. And as we said, profit is total revenue minus total economic cost. Markets are simply the interaction of these two groups through exchange. And we know markets determine where stuff gets allocated and what market prices are and those kinds of things. And finally, money plays a critical role in this system. The existence of enough money, which is primarily, by the way, checking account balances and currency in circulation. There has to be enough of that in the system so it's available to be used for exchanges and transactions. The Great Depression occurred because when the market crashed in '29, many banks went bankrupt because they had lent lots of money to people to buy stocks. And that further caused stocks to come down in price because you had to sell them because the bank was coming back and saying the collateral's not enough. But the major reason it continued was that the money supply declined by 1/3. 1/3 reduction in the amount of money in the system. And so capitalism was broken. Here was a building with the equipment to make shoes. Here were all the guys in the village who knew how to run the equipment. Here were all these people in the village who didn't have any shoes, and it wasn't happening, right? It was broken, right? And it was solved eventually by the government financing World War II and the central bank printing money to pay for it. I mean, that's the simple story. They bought government bonds, therefore increasing reserves in banks, which allowed banks to make more loans, which is where money, in fact, is created. So money plays a critical part. So scarcity implies three choices that have to be made by society, or the necessity of developing three systems. One is what will get produced. What will get produced. In the market system, that's determined by dollar votes of the buyers, right? That's how they decide what, in fact, to produce. Yellow cars, right? Good. I guess somebody likes them. And then how to produce, again, is done by business firms trying to maximize profit. What combination of inputs and technology to use, and for whom to produce within, although there are many forms of political distribution, such as Medicaid, Medi-Cal, Social Security, etc. Most of whom to produce is through the market, who has the wealth and the willingness to purchase those goods. Good, so that completes our discussion of scarcity, choice, and competition.